I really appreciate your solid biblical guidance. And my question is, I was reading a biblical theology book about marriage in the New Testament, and in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 11, it says to remain unmarried. And then in verse 15 of that same chapter, it permits to let go. So the author is advocating, he's like tying verse 15 back to 11, saying you're free to go, but you're not free to remarry.
Right. Well, the underlying concern of the Apostle Paul, a lot like Jesus, is if you can do without marriage, you should do without marriage. Because certainly if you're a Christian, the kingdom priority is to serve the Lord wholeheartedly. And he warns, once you get married, you got a lot of domestic anchors that tie you down to things that may take you away from or distract you from your kingdom mission. So, clearly, everything's leaning in the direction of Paul's testimony that it'd be better for you to be single if you can be, but it starts with the concession that most people can't be, right? Most of us desire romance and intimacy, and therefore we're going to want to get married, and he's giving the guidelines here, particularly to people in this section about who want to be divorced. So it's not an unusual interpretation to say, yeah, even if you do divorce in this situation, if it's an abandonment, that you shouldn't get remarried. But what I'm going to go to is the bottom of the passage when he speaks about freedom. He talks about being free, and you're free in the situation where you should let him go. And in that situation, he says, I'm calling for peace. And because of that, at the end of this text, when it speaks of that, it talks about getting remarried, and it uses the same kind of theme, right? It says, yeah, you can remarry, but only in the Lord. And because of the way it's put there in verse 39, I think, you could go back from 15 and go back up to 11, or you can say, yeah, but it seems like even though the preference is singleness and remaining single, the idea is if it's a biblical allowance, which was if you have a unbelieving spouse that doesn't want to live with you, let him go. You're free in that situation. God's called us to peace. Well, what kind of peace? Well, can you be at peace single? Well, then great, stay single. But if you can't, let's go back up to verse 1 and then bounce down to verse 39. I can't